Next on this page we have Android setup, and this is by the way valid for both Windows and Mac because Android is cross-platform and even the installation process is cross-platform. So we want to start off by downloading and installing Android Studio. So we are going to be taken to developer.android.com/studio, and we want to download Android Studio, the latest version, which is currently 3.3.2. And by the way, we are not going to be using Android Studio as our development environment, but we need to have Android Studio fully set up so that we can utilize the Android toolchain, because actually Flutter apps are not just running on Flutter itself, they are running on Android or iOS, or in the future they will even be able to run on the web with Project Hummingbird, but as of speaking they cannot run on web, so let's just focus on Android and iOS. So let's download Android Studio for Windows, and the same process that I already said applies to Mac. I also have a separate folder on local disk C for Android Studio versions, so let's just download that file over there. It has almost 1 GB, but the download is pretty fast here, so that's cool. In the meantime, we can return to the previous page, which is the Flutter setup. Okay, once the Android Studio setup is downloaded, we want to open the folder where it is now downloaded, and we want to start it. By doing this, I will already have 3 Android Studio versions installed on my machine, but what am I not going to do for you guys? So we want to just click on Next as always. Then we want to install both Android Studio and Android Virtual Device. Then you want to select the location for the installation of Android Studio. I am going to choose the C folder, Android Studio, and under that I want to create a new folder which will be just Flutter course, because I really do not need a real Android Studio installation. Oh, it did not save the folder name, so Flutter course here, Android Studio Flutter course. Let's put that Android Studio installation there. Now just click on Next. We're going to create a shortcut, alright, and it's going to be all nicely installed. So even though we're not gonna be using Android Studio as our development environment, we need it for Android SDK. We're not gonna use it because I feel that VS Code, Visual Studio Code, is a much better development environment for Flutter because it's lightweight, it doesn't take up, it doesn't stutter, and overall the experience in VS Code is just much better. But now let's click on Next, and we want to start Android Studio, this new installation. Otherwise the Android Studio executable is right under the bin folder. And actually, by installing Android Studio, you've also installed Android SDK. But just to make sure that SDK is configured properly, you want to click on this Configure button, go to SDK Manager, and you're going to be taken to Android SDK tab. And just make sure that you have at least one Android SDK set up here. So I have Android 9, Android P Preview, Android 8.0 Oreo. Just click on these check marks. And then also SDK tools, you want to make sure that you have Android SDK build tools, Android emulator, the latest version, and actually we can update these versions even now because I have some out-of-date versions. So Android emulator, Android SDK platform tools, Android SDK tools, they're really important. You want to have them definitely along with the build tools. And actually we are going to fully set up Android emulator later, just now make sure that you have this package downloaded here. And then you also want to install Intel x86 emulator accelerator so that the emulators are actually much faster. And then you are probably good to go. You can just download support repository if you want to and Google Play services and hit apply. You're going to be prompted to allow the installation and accept licenses. in case you have not yet accepted them. And it's all going to be installed in your SDK path, which was set up while installing Android Studio. So actually here you do not need to set up your path manually as you had to with Flutter, because Flutter setup was really just extracting a zip file. But here Android Studio has a complete executable installer, so it takes care of everything for you. Now you're gonna be prompted to set up the minimum amount of RAM for the Intel Hexam accelerator, so 2 GB is fine if you have that pre-selected. Once we have Android SDK successfully downloaded and set up, we can check if everything was successful by running the Flutter doctor command. So let's go to command line and run Flutter doctor once again. And now even you should have Android toolchain with a green check mark next to it, because now you actually have it installed, unless you were previously an Android developer. You will also have a check mark next to Android Studio, and you will still not have VS Code because we are going to install it later on. What we need to set up next is the Android emulator.